Hi. Today I am going to explain a 2002 sci-fi and action movie called The Time Machine. The film opens in 1899 at Columbia University in New York, where Dr. Alexander Hartdagen teaches applied mechanics and engineering. While deep in work, his friend, David Philby, reminds him he is almost late for an engagement with his girlfriend. Alexander had almost forgot, and they rush to his home. On their way, Alexander tells David that the dean rejected his proposal of utilizing solar power. And David says his ideas are too radical. Alexander says he wants his students to dream of what could be, and not be content and conservative like everybody else. He tells David to look around and observe how everyone have identical black bowler hats, saying he'd like to see people throw them away and question things. At home, we sees Mrs. Watchett, who's Alexander's housekeeper, an assistant. She tells Alexander to change to clothes that are not filled with chalks. David checks Alexander's inventions, like an electric toothbrush, and a city plan for the future. David tells Alexander he shouldn't waste time on that German crackpot Mr. Einstein. Alexander says that Mr. Einstein has some very interesting ideas, and that he himself will give him all the support that he can give. Soon after, Alexander leaves to meet his girlfriend. When he was about to enter a park, a woman asks if he wants to buy flowers, and Alexander recalls that he promised her to bring flowers with him. But he is immediately distracted by a spectacular machine, a horseless carriage. The driver accidentally starts it, and Alexander luckily grabs the brake and stops it immediately. The driver is thankful and offers Alexander a ride, even though he really wants to accept, but he has something that is more important to him, and continues into the park. He arrives at an ice skating rink, where his girlfriend calls his name. Her name is Emma, and she says he is late. Alexander says he came as soon as he could. She asks for her flowers, and Alexander says he forgot and sorry. He says he got distracted. He asks her to take a walk in the park, and she accepts. She notices he is shivering, and asks if everything is well. He says things are not so good without her in his life, and they are meant to be together, and he asks her to marry him. He picks up a ring with a moonstone, and she gets overjoyed, since it is her birthstone, saying she loves it. In a meanwhile, a man appears from the bushes, taking out a gun, demanding their wallet and jewelry. When he tries to take the ring, Alexander starts fighting him, and accidentally pulls trigger, causing a bullet to hit Emma. As Alexander embraces her, she bleeds out, and dies in his arms. 4 years later, we sees Alexander, and he was deep into his work, as David makes a visit, saying he is concerned about him. Alexander says he knows, but that he needs David to go. David says he won't leave him hiding like this, and asks what he is working on. Alexander stops him when he goes to see what's behind the curtains, and asks him to come by for dinner in a week, and he will show him. David agrees, and says he will see him in a week. But as he leaves, Alexander says quietly to himself, in a week, they will never even have had this conversation. Later, we sees Alexander is seen having cleaned himself up, taking his favorite pocket watch. After a mugger kills his fiancée Emma, he devotes himself to building a time machine that will allow him to travel back in time to save his fiancée Emma. In a meanwhile, we sees Alexander at the ice skating rink. But this time, Emma tells him he is early. Then, she asks for her flowers, but Alexander instead kisses her, which she likes. He tells her they should go to the city, and the two take a carriage to Bleecker Street. Later, as they were walking, Emma notices the horseless carriage, and tells Alexander to look, but Alexander ignores it, saying it's just a machine. Emma understands something is not as usual, and asks if something is wrong, since he never ignores spectacular inventions. And Alexander assures her everything is okay. He tells her she should go home and wait for him, and he will come back later. But Emma was confused why they didn't meet at the skating rink. She doesn't really understand, and is confused, but trusts him, and says okay. However, before leaving, she asks to get her flowers that he promised, and Alexander goes to buy them. But suddenly, the horseless carriage starts involuntarily, and frightens some horses on a horse-drawn carriage. And once again, Emma is killed in front of Alexander. Later, Alexander talks to David, saying this was not supposed to happen, since they were out of the park. As Alexander says, he could come back 1,000 times, and see her die 1,000 ways. And hearing him, David gets confused. Alexander realizes, he can't get the answers at this point in time. Later, Alexander is back in the time machine at his home, starting it up, pushing the lever forward, and seeing time speeding up. A day becomes equivalent to an hour, a month can then be seen in a minute, and eventually a full year passes in just seconds. His home disappears and becomes a garage. Fashion changes every instant, and the city skyline transforms. New technology is used, and humans now started living on Moon. And he arrives, in the year 2030. He stops the time machine, steps out, and sees future New York. Later, he goes through the city, to the New York Public Library. When he enters, he sees a holographic librarian, who introduces himself, as Vox 114. Alexander finds the technology very strange. Vox says, he is linked to every database on Earth, and asks him what he wants to know. Alexander asks, why one can't change the past. And the librarian shows him a science fiction book. But Alexander asks for real scientific literature. After which, Vox provides the answer, that you can't change it, because time travel is not possible. Alexander then thinks, he must go further into the future to get his question answered, and leaves. He starts going forward in time, but he feels a tremble, and immediately stops. Ending up in the year 2037. He sees that everything is destroyed. And soon after, a military vehicle arrives. Soldiers arrests him, saying, they must evacuate, since the moon is breaking up because of lunar colonists. In a meanwhile, the Earth's crust starts cracking, and Alexander manages to get back to the time machine. But a powerful earthquake knocks him unconscious, just as he starts time machine. Time begins to accelerate very fast, and outside, thousands of years pass every second. Trees grow, canyons are formed, and even ice ages come and go, before Alexander wakes up. He stops the machine, and ends up on Earth 800,000 years later. Later, Alexander is seen sleeping somewhere, dreaming of Emma, and being cared by a woman. The human race has reverted to a primitive lifestyle, and the Earth has healed. Some survivors, called Eli, live on the sides of cliffs, what was once Manhattan. When he wakes up, unaware of where he is, and puts on his clothes, as he does, he sees a boy. Seeing him, he starts running away. As he follows the kid, he suddenly stops to a breathtaking view of that village. The kid yells something that he doesn't understand, and suddenly people appear from all directions. They all speak an unknown language that he's never heard before. However, one woman says she knows the stone language and understands him. They begin to speak. Alexander says he came from past, but woman translates that he got hit in his head and is a wandering idiot. In the evening, Alexander talks to the woman, whose name is Mara, and her little brother Kalen. Alexander explains to the kid that he comes from a very busy place, where everyone walks around in black hats on their heads, and he gives Kalen his pocket watch. When Kalen has gone to sleep, Mara takes him on roof. He observes the broken moon, and realizes that maybe his teachings led to this future. He reveals he's from another time, and due to everything being weird about him, Mara believes him. One night, Alexander and Mara's younger brother, Kalen, dream of a frightening, jagged-toothed face and a creature calling their name. Alexander informs Mara of the dream, and she tells him they all have that dream, which Alexander finds strange. The next day, Mara shows Alexander a collection of stones, having words from the stone language on them. Later that day, Alexander asks her where all the older people are, and she answers, they have all gone to another place. He asks if she means they are dead, but she replies that some things are better left unsaid. She explains they don't dwell on the past, and remember their parents by making these big wind turbines. The two go on shore, and Mara leads him to the time machine. He examines it, and sees it seems to be fine. She then asks him if he can take Kalen with him. If it works, and Alexander asks why, but doesn't get a clear answer from her. Suddenly, strange sounds are heard and Mara starts running, yelling they must get to Kalin. As they get back, Alexander sees people panic. Strange creatures appear shooting darts, and Mara is hit by one of them. Alexander removes the dart from her shoulder. These ape-like monsters are called Morlocks, and they hunt the Eli for food. Alexander sees that Kalin has been hit by dart, and a Morlock has started chasing him. He runs to him and hits the creature to save him, and it starts chasing Alexander instead. As it catches up on him, Alexander dodges its attempt to attack him. He starts climbing up on a wind turbine, but the creature climbs after, and grabs him, and the two fall to the ground. The creature grabs him around his neck and starts to suffocate him, but Kalin appears with a torch, and saves Alexander. Then he hears, Mara is screaming, and the creature runs back into the woods, managing to take her instead with it down into the sand. Alexander is devastated, and tries to dig in the sand to no avail. He asks the people from the village why they don't fight back. He receives the answer that, those who fight back, are taken first. He then asks Kalin where people are taken, who tells him no one knows, but that there is a cave close by with ghosts that might help him. That night, Kalin leads Alexander to a cave. Alexander discovers Vox 114, which is still functional after 800,000 years. After learning from Vox how to find the Morlocks, Alexander enters their underground lair through an opening that resembles the face in his nightmare. Alexander tells Kalin to go back to the village, and Kalin reveals before he leaves that he lost his pocket watch. When he was in his room, those creatures took it. Alexander thinks why they would take it. Later, we sees Alexander walks in underground caves, and eventually arrives in a large hollow space with Morlocks. He finds a room with clothes in, and sees a necklace Mara wore. But as he sees knives and nasty tools, he gets shocked, trips, and falls down into a place with skeletons floating around in water. Soon after, a Morlock grabs him, and he is forced to go down into an enclosed area. Once down, he finds Mara in a cage, but who seems to be totally unresponsive. As Alexander turns around, he sees an intelligent, humanoid Uber Morlock, who explains that Morlocks are the evolutionary descendants of the humans who went underground after the moon broke apart, while the Eli are evolved from those who remained on the surface. The Uber Morlocks are a caste of telepaths who rule the other Morlocks, and able to see and control others' thoughts, even Alexander's. He tells Alexander that he controls the underground people so that they don't overconsume and exhaust the food supply. Alexander asks him if humans' role here is to be food, to which Uber Morlock answers, yes, except those who are suitable to be breeding vessels, like Mara. Alexander gets angry and says it's a corruption of every natural law, and Uber Morlock replies that his time travel is likewise a corruption of natural laws. Uber Morlock then tells that he is haunted by the question, what if? Uber Morlock creates a mental image in Alexander's head, showing his watch collection, his inventions, and his dream of Emma and of what could have been. Uber Morlock then explains to Alexander that he built the time machine because Emma died. If she had lived, it would have never existed, and so it is impossible for him to use the time machine to go back and save her. Saving her would be a virtual impossibility due to temporal paradox. Uber Morlock brings forth his time machine, and says, now that he has his answer, he should go back home. Alexander asks to get his pocket watch back, but as Uber Morlock gives it to him, Alexander grabs Uber Morlock, starts the machine, and the two start fighting in it. Eventually, Uber Morlock falls out of the machine, hanging from Alexander's throat, and dies due to rapidly aging outside of the machine's temporal bubble. Alexander stops in 600 million plus years, revealing a harsh, rust-colored sky over a wasteland of Morlock caves. He realizes the underground race have destroyed all life on the Earth's surface, accepting that he cannot save Emma. Then, Alexander travels back to rescue Mara. After freeing her, he starts the time machine and jams its gears by his pocket watch, creating a violent distortion in time. Pursued by the Morlocks, Alexander and Mara escape to the surface. as the time distortion explodes, killing the Morlocks and destroying their caves along with the time machine. Mara says she is sorry for his machine, and Alexander says it's alright, since it was just a machine, and the two hold hands. Later, we sees, Vox is seen telling children's stories from his large database of historical books. Alexander begins a new life with Mara, and the Eli. Alexander is seen showing Mara and Kaylin where his house once was, and describing how his home looked like inside. In 1903, David and Mrs. Watchett, Alexander's housekeeper, are in his laboratory discussing his absence. David tells Mrs. Watchett he is glad that Alexander has gone to a place where he can find peace. Then tells her that he would like to hire her as a housekeeper, which she accepts until Alexander returns. Mrs. Watchett bids Alexander farewell, and David leaves, looking toward the laboratory affectionately, then throws his bowler hat away, in tribute to Alexander's objection to conformity. And the movie ends here. To watch more videos like this, subscribe, turn on notification, and leave a like. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.